How's everybody feeling? Good. Feeling good? Feeling nice and toasty in this tiny room with one exit. My name is Kemi Adeyemi. I'm an assistant professor of gender, women, and sexuality studies here at UW. I'm also the director of the Black Embodiments Studio, which is a critical arts writing incubator and public lecture series here on campus. I work very closely with Emily Zimmerman and the Jacob Lawrence Gallery to put on BES and to be able to bring in people like Danny. So I'm really excited to be able to introduce him and that you're all here tonight. So thank you very much for being here. Danny Giles is a Chicago-based artist who makes work that often brings together live performance, video, and sculpture to address the dilemmas of representing and performing identity and to interrogate histories of oppression and creative resistance. Giles received his BFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in 2011, MFA Northwestern in 2013, and attended the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in 2013. Giles' work has been exhibited, performed, and screened at the Luminary in St. Louis, Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, El Museo Tamayo, Mexico City, and the Contemporary Arts Museum, Houston. Giles is currently a 2019 Bolt Artist in Residence at the Chicago Artists Coalition. Giles is part-time faculty of the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and academic director of the Oxbow School of Art and Artist Residency in Saugatuck, Michigan. And so Danny plays a key role in fostering critical arts discourse and community. This twinned practice of generating work and cultivating others' work contributed to Danny being selected for the 2019 Jacob Lawrence Legacy Residency. The residency honors Jacob Lawrence, who became a professor here at UW in 1970, and whose painting and printmaking skill was complemented by his critical perspective that never shied away from political and social issues. Established in 2015, the Jacob Lawrence Legacy Residency is the cornerstone of the gallery's program, as it enables artists, faculty, students, and staff to engage in dialogue as new work by Black artists is incubated and exhibited, not only here in this gallery, but I believe that this year is the first year that there's also a kind of co-exhibition, and that's happening right now at Soil, which is Seattle's oldest not-for-profit space. It's located in Pioneer Square. And I should note that this year is the 25th anniversary of the gallery, and I believe it's February 16th, and I also believe there's going to be a big party that I'm sure you're receiving information about, but it's being headlined by Sassy Black. I'm very happy that the Black Embodiments Studio can play a role in supporting Danny's time here in Seattle, and I'm going to just keep it brief by saying that I'm looking forward to hearing his talk about his work. After the talk, there's a reception with snacks and wine and waters and whatnot, and we'll be able to take in the show in kind of closer proximity. So please do stay. There will be a short Q&A, and then you'll also have time to interface with Danny after in a social setting. So please help me welcome Danny Giles.
Hey everybody, can everyone hear me? There's people back there. Thank you, Kimmy, for that really great introduction. Thank you, everyone here at UW. It's been amazing to be here. Kimmy is a friend from Chicago. Dan Paz met in Chicago, and many other people I've gotten to get to know here, and it's been a pretty intense period of work, but getting to know people has been really great. So thank you for welcoming me. And just so I don't forget, a few of the main people that have really helped me get started and work. Of course, Emily Zimmerman. Thank you so much for organizing, I don't know where she is, this residency, helping me get started work, seeing through this project with me. Kemi Adeyemi for inviting me to be part of the Black Embodiments Studio seminar group. Kimmy's students, thanks for coming. Thanks for having me the other day. Carol and Evan Fuller for welcoming me into their home while I'm here. Doug, Jinsu, and Andy at the CMA for helping me make work. It's been really great. Super helpful. Juan and Selena here at the Jake. My partner Charmine, who's here. It's been a lot of labor that's gone into the show, so I like to acknowledge people by name. There are other people, but that's goes without saying. So, I started with this image. I want to give you an idea of how I think about research, what a research practice might look like.
Anybody know what this is? Look like a normal barrel, right? It's called a laughing barrel. See, back in slavery, y'all, slaves weren't allowed to laugh in public. So if you felt yourself happen to laugh, you had to hold that laughter in and find you one of these and run over there real quick and stick your head inside of it and get your laughter out. No bullshit, read. Slave laughing barrel photo. This is a slave laughing barrel. Let me show you another one. Look. It say, in slavery times, the slaves were not allowed to laugh in many plantations. And that's called a laughing barrel. To get more information on the laughing barrel, just go to Google and put in slavery laughing barrel. Y'all, it was all kind of stuff happening in slavery. You think you know everything about it? Wrong. Keep researching, y'all. We'll never know it all. You never heard of the laughing barrel? I know it sounds funny, but don't laugh, y'all. And if you do feel yourself about to laugh, find you one of these barrels. No, but no joke, y'all. This is some deep history about slavery that most of us ain't know. That's why I did this quick video.
Yeah, let's cut it off there. So that was a YouTube link that led me partway through my research in this project. I'm going to talk about this project I did in 2016 because I think it precedes a lot of the work in this show. So you didn't get to see the YouTube video, but if you were seeing it, you would basically see this image. So this is an image of a laughing barrel. And just to back up, I love this. I mean, I love this quote. I love this sort of kind of reference for a narrative that is not completely codified in history. So that link, that video, that man talking about the laughing barrel, this quote speaks to what I love about, one of the things I love about Black culture and how it kind of exists today within the realm of YouTube or the internet, the sort of oral history and how stories get passed down, whether through a joke, through chatter, through banter, information is disseminated through these different channels of human interaction. So this idea of the laughing barrel is something that I came to by way of a Ralph Ellison essay called An Extravagance of Laughter. In this essay, Ralph Ellison speaks about his predicament of being thrust within a white audience watching a play by Erskine Caldwell in New York City in the 80s. This story, this play by Caldwell is called Tobacco Road. And Ralph Ellison, just arriving from the South, finds himself in New York and in a white audience watching this play about poor whites in the South. So he feels this sort of indelible and insuppressible urge to laugh, this sort of recognition of his own upbringing in the South as a Black man. Now in another context, watching this drama and comedy of racialized folly sort of unfold in front of his eyes. So he's in this sort of visceral state of laughter, and it infiltrates the rest of the audience. So Ellison begins to sort of fantasize about this in-group joke that he learned during Tuskegee. The laughing barrel, to quote from Ellison, in the theater, suddenly, in addition to my soul-racking agony of embarrassment, I was being devastated by an old in-group joke, which played upon the themes of racial conflict, social freedom, and the blackness of Negro laughter. A joke whose setting was some small southern town in which Negro freedom of expression was so restricted that its public square was marked by a series of huge whitewashed barrels labeled four-colored, and into which any Negro who felt a laugh coming on was forced, pro bono publico, to thrust his boisterous head. Going on, reflecting on the laughing barrel, Ellison writes, "From the joke, the barrel was considered a civic necessity and had been improvised as a means of protecting the sensibilities of whites from a peculiar form of insanity suffered exclusively by Negroes, who in the light of their social status and past condition of servitude were regarded as having absolutely nothing in their daily experience which could possibly inspire rational laughter. And yet Negroes continued, much as one side of me was doing, to laugh." So just to back up, before I go further into this project, my work often is in response to artists like Ellison, visual artists, writers, and critical thinkers around contemporary visual black forms. Before I keep going to my talk, I want to quote a few other thinkers that have really grounded me for the last few years through these projects. Huey Copeland and Christopher Franklin speak about the terminology they conceived of as Afrotropes in the following language. "We coined the term Afrotrope as a shorthand way of referring to the recurrent visual forms that have emerged within and become central to the formation of African diasporic culture and identity. Whether the slave ship icon produced in 1788 by the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade in Britain, or the 19th century lithograph of an enslaved muzzled woman that became the locus for the cult of Anastasia in Brazil in the 1970s. As these examples intimate, Afrotropes are often translated across various cultural domains, as well as transmitted over time and space, accruing particular density at certain moments and seeming to volatilize out of sight at others." Thinking about the laughing barrel as an Afrotrope. Fred Moten and Stefano Harney, in their mind-bending, masterful work of theory called The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning, and Black Study, describe the Black aesthetic in the following terms. "The Black aesthetic turns on a dialectic of luxuriant withholding, abundance and lack push technique over the edge of refusal, so that the trouble with beauty, which is the very animation and emanation of art, is always and everywhere troubled again and again. New technique, new beauty. At the same time, the Black aesthetic is not about technique, is not a technique, and though a fundamental element of the terror-driven anesthetic disavowal of our terribleness, is the eclectic sampling of techniques of Black performativity. In the interest of the unproblematically dispossessive assertion of an internal difference, complexity or syntax, which was always and everywhere so apparent that in the assertion is a kind of self-indulgent, self-exculpatory superfluity. Such assertion amounts to an attempt to refute claims of Blackness's atomic simplicity that have never been serious enough to refute, as they were made unfalsifiably without evidence by way of reasonable, though wholly rationalized motivations, in bad faith and dogmatic slumber." So just some words going forward that can kind of act as a compass to the rest of my practice. Thinking about technologies of Blackness, which include technologies for being seen and avoiding being seen, this project also dealt with the Black body within white space. This is an installation at Sector 2337 in 2016. It was sort of the linchpin for this larger installation on the Laughing Barrel. So the video is not playing. So, again, if you would be seeing this video, you'd be seeing the inside of this barrel change as new imagery is projected from behind. So that's a mesh, screen mesh. It's being projected. Images from Erskine Caldwell's Tobacco Road, stock images of white people labeled white through Google search, and this canned laughter, which is performers, friends of mine, recorded in the space, playing off of this idea of a kind of incessant, kind of invading laughter. So thinking about the barrel as a sort of a stage, as a portal, as an invisibility cloak, as a hole in the ground, as something that's simultaneously hypervisible and sort of obscuring the figure. I made several works around the barrel itself as an art object, as a space for reading, text from Ellison's essay. Installation view. And so these objects started to populate my studio at the same time I was working on the barrel work. I needed a figure to sort of ground the installation. I had these barrels. I was working with the barrel as a site, as a visual platform, as a space for reading through the story, visually narrating that space. But I found that I needed some kind of figure to kind of push that representation to a more a space of fullness, and a space of performativity. And so these heads were populating the space around the barrels, and these are plaster and charcoal casts of Obama masks. So the kind that you see in protests. Obama wore one himself on SNL. Maybe you saw that episode. Search Obama mask in Google, and you'll see a lot of different images. But this became kind of the specter of this kind of monolithic blackness, this performative black self, and the kind of contradictory state of being seen and not seen. So this work is continued into the present. Some of this will be on view at Soil later next month, and continues to kind of reappear throughout my practice. You can't see too well from where you're sitting because of the light, but this is an all-black face. There are chips of charcoal in the face. And so this use of charcoal really started with this installation, or these bodies, these faces and these barrels. And so thinking about the inside of a barrel as being blackened, charred, full of charcoal to seal it from the outside, started to invade the bodies themselves. An example. And so I'm going to show you a few other projects, but I think from the Laughing Barrel project onward, there's a real kind of concern for technologies that render us visible and a sort of wish for a way to negate them or destroy them or make them see themselves. This is an object found all over the streets of Chicago. They started to look a little bit different. There are new models being rolled out, but this is sort of the retro version of a police observation device. So this is an object that I've noticed since I moved to Chicago, and mostly neighborhoods that I've lived in, live in a neighborhood right now called Pilsen on the southwest side. And it's a neighborhood that kind of typifies the location of these police observation devices, which are surveillance cameras run through the Chicago Police Department that are supposedly always recording or always capable of video recording. So this program began in the early 2000s. It continues to this day. The blue light on top is always flashing. It's visible from the street, and these are found all over the city of Chicago, and particularly in poor working class communities of color. The politics of where these cameras show up is interesting because some communities very much want them, seek them out. Some of them, there's less of transparency and conversation around how one's being surveilled. But thinking about a city like Chicago, where policing communities of color, violent over-policing, is always an ever-present aspect of living in the city. Myself, living under these cameras, I started to get really curious about how they might be affecting me personally, or anyone who notices them and knows what they're used for. And so this idea of the Panopticon, which is a tower in the middle of a jail that is capable of surveilling all of the prisoners and encodes that surveillance upon those subjects, which now we're surveilling ourselves, or in this ever sort of self-aware state of watching and being watched. I got really curious about how I could intervene within this technology. And so this is a facsimile of a police observation device mounted in a gallery space in Chicago. And I wanted to make this object. I wanted to see it perform sort of as a sort of performance of light in a space. And the idea of its sort of inversion somehow came to mind in the process of making this object. So flipping it upside down and creating a light fixture created this dynamic where now the surveillance object is a kind of party fixture. So I'd like to show video. So this is documentation of the final installation. These are shots from around Pilsen in Chicago. That's how these things function. So that's the side of an apartment building that's being lit up. So thinking about being watched and being watched by a panoptic device controlled by the state, the police state, as being a state of being feeling quite unfree, I was interested in how to use the same technology to help us render our bodies into a space of feeling more free. So this is transitioning to the actual space of the facsimile. And so this space was a blacked out gallery space. The object with the camera removed, and with these lights became a dance space. So I invited performers to come into the space, listen to music on headphones, and so there's no music playing in the space, but people are dancing to their own soundtrack. And to come and dance in the space is sort of dance marathon, so a durational performance of about 20 performers. This was pretty amazing. I had people dance I had shifts of like 2 hours. People ended up dancing for the whole 4 or 5 hours of the opening. People showed up uninvited and welcomed themselves into the piece and started dancing. And so this was about a 4 or 5 hour performance originally. Has been shown again in Chicago in a larger venue, which was interesting to see how that translated in the space. But another aspect of this performance was a handing off of the panoptic photographic technology to the performers themselves. So the documentation is created through the performance of the piece by the dancers in the space. So the documentation changes each time. So this work was really indebted to the work of two artists, Felix Gonzalez Torres, amazing piece, Go-Go Dancing Platform, 91. Here, a singular performer is dancing, sort of, it's a different performer each time, so the style varies, but in a kind of hypersexualized, sort of drawing the gaze to a singular point of this greased down male body. So thinking about flipping those dynamics of the spectator's gaze within the space of the work of art outward and diffusing it within a space, and the audience member themselves being the focus of the gaze of the performers in the case of my work, rather than in this piece, the gaze being centered on a singular focal point of the performing object, the performing body. And this piece by David Hammond's Concerto in Black and Blue was shown at Ace Gallery in 2003. The only thing present in the space were the audience members holding these blue LED flashlights. And so thinking about a work like that by Hammond's, thinking about what it means to simply occupy space, to be in a space incidentally and be seen by others. This work, which is another group performance in the MCA 2017, thinks about the act of looking, being seen in public, as something that can, without much labor, really change the way an individual sees themselves in relationship to that space. So I was interested in loitering and wasting time in public, and laziness and restfulness, and sort of that kind of mundane messiness of being a human. The ways in which that is criminalized when certain bodies perform those mundane gestures, such as living, walking, sleeping, eating, particularly if those bodies are bodies of color. So this is one posture in a sort of moving arrangement of durational performance gestures, making eye contact with viewers of this exhibition. So there are microphones placed in front of the performers, but there was no speech performed. This is sleeping. This is embracing. So what does vagrancy look like as an aesthetic form? So coming up to some more recent work. This is the graphic for an event I was a part of this last fall, a talk at the MCA called Art and Violence Then and Now. And it was in response to this exhibition that was curated 50 years ago last year, so 1968, at the MCA, which was called Violence in Recent American Art. And so this is an early exhibition attempting to be interdisciplinary and nominally diverse, I'd say, but and wide-ranging practices at that time for Chicago of artists dealing with violence. And so it was sort of a catalog of violence, police violence, visual violence, domestic violence. And so I was a part of a group of artists and curators and art historians who were researching the show and had a talk on stage at the MCA in response. For that show, I also remounted this performance in video, which was made in 2015. It's called Dead Air. And so this is recently on display. The Contemporary Art Museum in Houston is on its way to Tufts University as part of an exhibition called Walls Turn Sideways. Artists investigate artists respond to the criminal justice system, curated by Risa Puleo. And so this work was made in direct response to the killings of unarmed Black folks that all of us can't escape hearing about, and done at a time in which the reaction to that violence itself focused on a kind of visuality of protests that was interested in both the fact of my position as an artist and having a certain kind of access to visuality, and then also thinking about that kind of double bind of representing violence at a time in which the representation of that violence is uncontrollable, and that our exposure to graphic instances of death and Black death are often thrust upon us and put in front of us in ways in which are perhaps traumatizing a second time. And so thinking about how to respond to a kind of visuality, emphasis on visuality of Black death, but also how to start to create a language or mold language to visualize the perpetrators of that violence and that Black death. And so visualizing whiteness as a state apparatus of death and the chains of communication that leverages the privileges of whiteness or non-Blackness to weaponize Blackness against itself. And so that visualization of the Black body becomes that the thing that renders Black death, the thing that provokes the violence of the state. And so I was also thinking about sources of texts in which the writer visualizes the position of the enactor of violence. And so thinking about simultaneously rendering visible and giving space to victims of violence, but also creating a space that we can see and recognize those that enact violence, both physically in terms of being the one with the hand on the trigger, and in calling in deputizing state violence, calling the cops. And so this piece, which I'll show you part of, references several literary works in which the protagonist is the one who pulled the trigger, is the one who enacted violence. Crime and Punishment, Native Son, are two of the books referenced. And then there are various accounts of police officers and those who have leveraged their power violently over others. What that felt for how that felt for them. What does it feel like to victimize another? I didn't just mute it.
Yeah, you did.
I did. So this piece has been shown 3 times now, which I think of as kind of a meaningful cycle of different permutations of the piece as a video and performance, video performance installation. Originally, I was the sole performer performing a die-in, so a popular form of protest, especially during Black Lives Matter, early days of Black Lives Matter, Vietnam War protests, anti-nuclear protests, this kind of performance of death at the hands of a state apparatus, and so usually performed as a huge public display of death at a sort of symbolic timestamp. And so the original performance was me performing in a space called Three Walls in Chicago. The video was showing on one wall. I was performing on the other side of the room. The space was black. And so those spaces in between the text, the spoken text and the text on the screen were times to reorient your gaze from either the video screen or the person on the ground. And so I was interested in that kind of split of attention, that kind of being pulled between actual events unfolding in real time with real people in the world versus those things playing out on a screen, and that sort of simultaneity of presence of a mediated representation of real world events and those very things happening at the very same time, not far away. And so that sort of splitting of the attention was really the emphasis on the initial performance. In Houston, it was shown just as a video, and so you were really just directed towards the screen. And at this performance at the MCA last year, I had a group of 10 performers, performers of color, performing on stage in front of the video. And so that sort of group of bodies was collapsed with the text and the audio. This is a shot from rehearsal. And so we held sort of rehearsal and workshop around the idea of lying still, around the related to a previous piece that you saw, movements, quotidian movements of simply occupying space. And so each of these performers held postures related to being in public space that overlapped with gestures of arrest and escape from the police. And so the piece ended with everyone on the ground and one by one rising and leaving the stage. So I'm almost done. I'm gonna pivot to talk a little bit about the work in this show, and I'm not showing images of it because they're surrounded by it. And to give you a little bit of an idea of how I'm centering these drawings and installations here in the Jake Gallery. So thinking about that piece, the Laughing Barrel and all the research involved with that work has really brought me to a present moment of how to more fully and intentionally further this project of visioning whiteness, rendering it visible as a structure, not of necessarily ethnicity, but of a logic of governance, of a logic of invisibility, of a logic of control and normativity from my embodiment as a non-white person. And so thinking about all these technologies of the camera, the police apparatus, the Laughing Barrel, as all performing within this kind of these various histories of being a body of color within a white space. So hence the title of this show. And so my thinking has led me through my training as an artist and attempting to understand the tools that I've been given, the texts that I have read have been encoded within my skill set, my historical frame of reference, the visual languages we use to create form, how those have been imbricated within the study or the construction of a white worldview. And so thinking about art history as a structure that has also given us tools for picturing ourselves and has contributed to the knowledge of the self, how has that also contributed to the language that we have to talk about the construction of identity? And so I kind of start with this person, Johann Winkleman, who's known as the father of Western art history, and is largely responsible for the fact that we idolize whiteness as a state of sort of objective beauty within a visual, Western visual worldview. And so his study of Greco-Roman sculpture contributed to the early scholarship around notions of ideal beauty in the West. And so he was really heavily invested in the whiteness of Greco-Roman sculpture, the physique of the white male form as being a sort of penultimate ideal version of beauty. Purposefully ignoring the fact that said sculpture was polychromatically painted, was often in heavy dark colors. The Parthenon was not a white structure, but the insistence on this whiteness as the ideal state of visual form actually almost contribute to the destruction of pieces of the Parthenon taken to be restored in Britain. So I'm interested in this idea of a sort of the vulnerability of the white form in this state of reduction of color, and its sort of insistence as a prevailing ideal in visual art that also has a root in anatomical science and biology. And so here you see what Winkelmann viewed as the ideal form of beauty, the Apollo as the representation of the European beauty ideal, used within a racist taxonomy to justify, the idea of polygenesis, of races rising from different points of origin at a point in time in which European colonialism was ramping up, and such images could be used to justify the enslavement of non-white people. So I'm interested in the sort of the root of a visual vocabulary of studio art study being intermixed within pseudoscientific legacies of, scientific racism. So here's another taxonomy. Petrus Camper, interestingly, originally allowed him to sort of disprove potentially racist theories that put black people or non-white people closer to animals than the Europeans, and that the facial angles of brown people are closer to that of Europeans, but later on was taken on its own to justify putting on a visual hierarchy, black people, brown people closer to that of animals. And so we can track this into modern contemporary moment and these textbooks that we, still might use to study anatomy. This is taken from the Atlas of Human Anatomy from the artist. It was around mid-60s. And so again, the sort of very crisp 1 through 17 hierarchy of whiteness. And so I've been trying to think about why is this work important or even interesting. Why am I sort of fixated on the sort of visual history of art history and the study of studio art? One, I'm a teacher and a student of art, and so this is a sort of site of passage for a lot of sort of questionable worldviews that might feel a little bit innocuous as a sort of objective fact of learning difference as an artist. And another is just where we are as a country, who's participating in these visual forms. So these are stickers. This is propaganda by a party called Identityeuropa. So one of the myriad alt-right proto-neo-fascist groups that have come up in the last several years. They are heavily invested within the visual language of classical notions of beauty as whiteness. And so I feel like there are many super contemporary, very, very current sort of representations of the stakes of understanding this language, how it's deployed, how these cultural tropes are used to justify ideals of dominance or difference, and then as artists to understand how we've maybe unknowingly bought in. So I think I'm gonna end it there because I'm close to an hour. Maybe questions? Are we doing that?
Let's just take about 2 or 3 questions.
I just wanted to thank you for your presentation and your work, but we talked a little bit about coming to Seattle and being in this environment and taking your ideas and being able to make something happen in the space in this real time. What do you think was your biggest challenge?
Oh man, I think for me deciding what work to start here and kind of what I needed to get going was a big challenge. So spent a lot of time thinking just logistically about how to get materials here, how much of the work was able to be produced before, how much had to happen here. Most of the work in this show was made right where we're sitting in this room. And so I ended up producing a lot of stuff here. And so the kind of research and the thinking preceded a lot of the drawing, mostly drawing work here, and then kind of followed me into the studio. Yeah.
Hi. So what made you, it seemed like your past work was focused a lot more on like multimedia projects, and so with this, what was the kind of thinking behind something more TV or print or it looks like sand-based or?
Yeah, so these are charcoal drawings with other medium mixed in. There's pumice, so like kind of sandy stuff. I've always made work in the studio. I've always made objects and maybe what you might call drawings, like work on paper, as just something that I enjoy to do with my hands. I came to art practice through painting and drawing, and so I really think of those things sharing this space most of the time, but a lot of the work that gets shown is more project-based and time-based. I think it's a matter of what opportunities show up at what times for what kind of work. But I think of the drawing work, this work, and other work in the past as usually been a space of thinking through the ideas that also get filtered into performance or video or some other kind of form. So it's it's a kind of a whole practice, you know, and so you don't always get a very clear idea of like what's in the head of an artist when they're moving from one project to next by looking at a slideshow or a website, but it all kind of it's all the work, you know, it all kind of happens usually at the same time. I think that I've been desiring a space of more stillness or more kind of like autonomous production that doesn't need to be programmed, maybe in response to doing a lot of work like that. So I think the show is a physical space that kind of could allow for making things, putting them on the wall, and so I kind of just like embraced that.
There's a question here.
Yeah.
You were kind of like inadvertently touching on it without like intentionally doing so, but like I can see through the work that you shared with us tonight, kind of like a progression of thinking through ideas up until this work right here. So how do you see this work that you've done in this residency influencing your future works?
That's a good question. I'll probably have to wait until I can chill and not make work
Yeah.
to realize where that'll be.
Okay.
And maybe some stillness will
Yeah.
show me the way. I think probably some more drawings and thinking about space more. So the wall installation came was sort of conceived of here. I didn't come here with that, so maybe thinking about taking up more space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Influences your work.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, but I think napping and
Yeah. I mean, hey, yeah, that's good for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think one last. I'm interested in the way that you use audio to define architecture, and when you showed the video with the with the light, the Panopticon, is it Panopticon lights in Chicago? The ones, the pendant lights that are on the street, and how it flashes on the buildings and basically gives them a different kind of character. I have two questions. Are you also able to get the audio? Is there an audio component of those lamps? Can people be heard who are standing under the lamps?
There is, it does capture street level audio, yeah.
And can you have access to that?
If it's on YouTube, which I've taken before.
And so the oral piece is where it becomes inside a person's head, pretty much? How the piece where you brought that inside?
You're talking about the barrel piece?
No, when you had your performers. And they were using
Other
their own
headphones,
sound.
yeah.
It's not often that there's a visual for audio. And I'm just interested in how you think about it with architecture.
So sound in relation to architecture and visualizing sound. I mean, it's an interesting question. I could probably think about it a few different ways. I think if I'm understanding visualizing sound, the sort of movement involved in creating sound, I think sound is a physical material, and it comes from performance and vibration of air and space. And so I think it's, if you really think about that installation, the people moving in the space is creating the soundtrack for the viewer that's not participating in the performance. And so you can really hear the like scuffs on the floor and breathing. So that is really the sound of that work. And so that's, I think, is a very sculptural kind of sound, very kind of like material, bodily, visceral sound as a soundtrack for the work. And the music that people are listening to is, I mean, that's for them. That's not, you don't hear that in the piece. That's to generate the sound of bodies. So I think, does that answer, isn't it like kind of...
It's a good place to start.
Yeah.